Living in an industry that's all about moving fast and breaking things, the good old traditional laptop has proved remarkably resilient to change. But the last few years have seen interesting hybrid devices, like your iPad Pro, your Surface Book 3, become increasingly viable alternatives to clamshell laptops like a MacBook Pro or a Dell XPS. But which one of these two is more likely to be the future of laptops? And more importantly, which one is better for you to buy right now? So these devices have a bunch of different names. Some call them hybrids, some call them transformers, some call them two-in-ones, but basically they're devices that are both laptops and tablets. And there are kind of two main ways that companies go about making them. First, you have devices like the iPad Pro. It's a standalone tablet and a really powerful one at that, and you can attach it to a case with a keyboard, and now you got a laptop. And Apple upped the ante really significantly in May with the Magic Keyboard. So until May, all of the keyboards were just keyboards, but now you have a trackpad too. So obviously, even visually, it's less distinguishable from a laptop than ever before. The iPad Pro plays this game exceptionally well, but it's definitely not the only one. In fact, it was really Microsoft that helped popularize this type of machine with the Surface Pro line, which has been releasing every year since 2013. Then you have your other type of hybrid, which takes a laptop and turns itself into a tablet. So you have your laptop, you've got your screen over here, and then it rotates around the keyboard, and then you got yourself a meaty little tablet. The Surface Book 3 does this differently. You can detach the screen from the laptop base, giving you a standalone tablet. This feature is pretty sweet, and right now you can only get it on a Surface Book. Obviously, these devices are really different. It's really not an apples to apples comparison. It's really more like an Apple to Microsoft comparison. But yeah, fantastic jokes aside, these devices are quite different. The iPad is more of a slick, ultra-portable slate, and the Surface Book, while still being exceptionally designed, is really more of a powerhouse. It's bigger and bulkier. And that's evident just looking at the specs. Almost all of the configurations for the Surface Book 3 have an Intel Core i7 and a dedicated graphics card, whereas the iPad Pro has Apple's A12Z chip, which is super good, but it's really more of a mobile processor than a full-blown laptop processor. That's maybe even more evident in the price. The 13.5-inch Surface Book 3 starts at $1,600, but that only gets you an i5 processor and integrated graphics. Really, if you're going to splurge this much, you'd want to spend $2,000, and that'll get you 16 gigabytes of RAM, an i7, and more importantly, NVIDIA graphics. Now compare that with the iPad Pro. The 11-inch starts at $799, that's for 128 gigabytes of storage, and all of them come with 6 gigabytes of RAM. But then you want to add on 300 on top of that for the Magic Keyboard. So we're talking about $1,100 versus $1,600, but really $2,000. But that's talking entry level. What happens if you max the specs out? Well, an iPad Pro 12.9-inch, 1 terabyte with cellular and a Magic Keyboard will cost you $2,000. Then you have your Surface Book 3 for business, which has 2 terabytes of storage and an NVIDIA Quadro graphics chip for really intense work. That will cost you $3,700. So you don't need to tell me in the comments, I know, they're different. So why are we comparing these two? Well, one of the major marketing points of both is that they're not traditional computers. This is especially true of Apple. If you go on its website, on the iPad Pro section, you'll see Apple tells you your next computer is not a computer. So how do these not computers fare? Both of these not computers are awesome in their own way, but they also make compromises in their own way. Which one is better is really more of a question of which is better for you. Historically, iPads have been consumption devices, good for watching Netflix, reading books, etc., etc. And just because the iPad Pro has Pro in its name doesn't really change that. Yes, peripherals and accessories make this more like a laptop, but where the iPad Pro shines, like really shines, is still in viewing content rather than making content. It's not that the iPad Pro can only do these things, it's that the iPad Pro does these things exceptionally well. For me personally, a lot of what I do on a laptop-ish device is read and watch stuff. And I would rather do both of those things on the iPad Pro over the Surface Book 3. And there are 3 main reasons for that. First is the size of the tablet itself. At 13.5 inches, the Surface Book is a bit unwieldy. It's a bit clumsy to find the right position to be able to read or even watch something for a long period of time. You do get a bit of that problem with the 12.9-inch iPad, but you get a whole lot more of that problem with the 15-inch Surface Book. Second is the display itself. I'm a really big fan of the Surface Book 3 screen. It's 3000 by 2000, which is a 3:2 ratio, which is awesome. And it's sharp and crisp, and I love it. But I love the iPad Pro screen just a bit more. Its blacks are deeper, and as a result, the colors are richer. The third reason is the speakers. So this isn't really a pro with the iPad Pro as much as it is a con with the Surface Book 3. Although the iPad does have very good speakers, the Surface Book 3 speakers are just way too soft. They sound decent, there's not a problem with the quality, it's just that they're really, really soft. Not only are the speakers in the iPad Pro much louder, the speakers in my iPhone are also louder.
So there you have it, this watch is already running the public beta of watchOS 7. And I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right in to sleep tracking because obviously the recommended amount is 8 hours. That's not realistic for me, but I'm just gonna go ahead and set it up like that. This is what my schedule looks like. My bedtime is 11 p.m. and my wake up is 7 a.m. Now, I don't know.
Another reason why I generally found the iPad to be a bit more satisfying to use than the Surface Book is the fact that the iPad has a dedicated operating system. So last year, Apple unveiled iPad OS, a dedicated operating system for the iPad. It's not quite there yet. There's still some things that need to be improved on and some potential that's yet to be realized. But it's still better than Windows 10 for tablets. So Windows 10 is great for the Surface Book when you're using it as a laptop. But when it's in tablet mode, it's not quite as fluid or smooth. A lot of that has to do with the App Store. So by now, the App Store and the Google Play Store, they're kind of not terribly exciting, but it's definitely a case of you don't know what you got until it's gone, because the Microsoft Store pales in comparison. The Microsoft Store does have some essentials like Facebook, Instagram, and so on, and it's also got a lot of Microsoft's own apps like Skype and of course Office 365. But outside of that, it hasn't got really anything else. Now obviously, when you're using the Surface Book as a laptop, that's not really a problem at all, because Windows 10 is an excellent operating system for laptops, desktops, computers. It just means that as a tablet, things are a little bit more clumsy, more awkward, and take a few more steps than they otherwise should. It's not a deal breaker, it's simply that as a tablet, it can't compare to the iPad Pro. But once we start talking about productivity, that's where things shift into the Surface Book 3's favor. So iPad OS feels great to use, and certainly accessories like the Magic Keyboard let you get more productivity out of your iPad. But really, when it comes to workflow, it can't really compare to a fully fledged Windows 10 device like the Surface Book 3. So a key reason for that is that a lot of the apps you'll find on the iPad are not the fully fledged versions you'd find on a desktop, Windows, or even Mac. So for instance, Adobe Photoshop. Adobe famously and to much hype brought Photoshop to the iPad last year. And though it has a lot of the functionality, it doesn't have all of the functionality, which means that if you're a pro, you'll need a laptop to work with the iPad, and the iPad can't really replace a laptop. I'm not an artist, but I did have personal experience with this with, say, Google Docs. So Google Docs is good enough for me to use on the iPad for 90% of my job. However, the iPad app version of Google Docs doesn't let you see comments left by your editor, which in my case are a lot, because I'm terrible, and write at the same time. So when I was amending suggestions, I had to see the suggestions in read mode and then fix them in write mode. Again, that only comes up with like 10% of my workflow, but it's important enough for me to just switch to a laptop. The iPad Pro does a lot of productivity stuff really well. If you're an office worker or a creative, there's a good chance you can do a lot or even most of your job on an iPad Pro. But at the moment, you probably can't do all of your job on an iPad Pro. So that brings us to graphical power. This Surface Book is actually rather unusual. It's a 13-inch laptop, 13.5-inch laptop, with a dedicated graphics card. It's got a NVIDIA GTX 1650 Max-Q card, which is really, like I said, unusual for a 13-inch laptop. That means on this, you can do a lot more than your average 13-inch laptop and certainly your average tablet, namely video editing and gaming. So that graphical power will really benefit two groups of people. Firstly, obviously, gamers. The Surface Book 3 will let you play most mainstream games, all the mainstream games, but you'll need to turn the settings down on a few, but that's still pretty good for a laptop of this size. You'll also be able to do some light video editing. I'm going to stop there for just a moment and say that a lot of the pros I just listed don't really apply to the 15-inch in the same way, because while the 13-inch is overpowered compared to its 13-inch competitors, the 15-inch is a little bit underpowered, but you can read CNET's full review on that to see more. Now, it's not that the iPad is underpowered, and in fact, the CPU of the iPad benchmarked similarly to the CPU in the Surface Book 3, which is crazy, and a lot of that is because Microsoft used a lower wattage processor because it lives in the screen and not the laptop base. But either way, the iPad is certainly not an underpowered device. It's just in a different league power-wise to the Surface Book 3, and it should be, because the Surface Book 3 is anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 more expensive than the iPad Pro. But there is one hardware spec that could end up being a big deal for Apple, which the Microsoft Surface Book currently doesn't have, and that's AR. The 2020 iPad Pro, in addition to 2 rear cameras, also has a LiDAR sensor, which is essentially a depth sensor, which helps with AR apps. So Apple's been investing really heavily in AR. Right now, it's not that big of a deal. No apps have really broken through and become widely useful, but you know, who knows? I'm in a bind right now because I really like both of these products. The Surface Book is powerful, it has one of the best keyboards I've ever used, and its detachable screen is big and beautiful. However, the iPad Pro has a screen that's even better, and it's got that it just works feeling that comes with Apple's best products. The iPad Pro is actually maybe my favorite device out there, but at the same time, it's hard to recommend as a laptop replacement. I'm really more excited of these two about the future of the iPad and iPad OS. And if you're looking for a complement to your laptop and workflow, this is about as good as it gets. I love this device. But if you're talking about one device, if you had to choose one, I would go with the Surface Book 3. So which one of these excites you more? Are you more interested in the ultra-portable iPad or the desktop replacement Surface Book 3? Keen to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.